Hi, I'm Aron Ra, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Hello, I'm Britt.
And I'm Brandi.
Welcome to Atheist Edge. Today, we're talking about a fairly controversial subject. We plan to focus on the topic of gender and how it has evolved culturally. We'll also be addressing modern concepts of how gender is or isn't of biological origin. By no means do either of us claim to be experts on the topic, but we do try to educate ourselves while valuing what actual scientific studies show us and not relying too much on bias or forming opinion only based on emotion. There seems to be a lot of this happening not only in the realm of gender and sexuality, but also in many political conflicts, whether that be within our current government or even on college campuses. I guess I'd also like to mention that many of the topics we're discussing today are of a very sensitive nature, and out of compassion toward any individuals currently questioning their own sexuality, gender, or even having doubts about their faith or religion, I'd like to point them toward a few of the following resources, which will be linked in our video description. A few resources will be trevorproject.org, International Association for Suicide Prevention, that's at iasp.info. And in the U.S., you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. And another resource is recoveringfromreligion.org. And I suppose I should introduce myself a little bit, just to clarify what point of view we're coming from. I was assigned female at birth and still strongly identify as female. I was always somewhat of a tomboy and played outdoors a lot, mostly enjoyed playing with mechanical or discovery toys, but did also have Barbies, stuffed animals, what have you. And I've always mostly shopped in the boys and men's section for clothing, but that's simply my style. I just never was comfortable in dresses or women's clothing really of any kind. Then I didn't realize I had a sexual preference for women until I was about 18 and was not sexually active until then. I'm now 33 years old and am currently in a monogamous relationship with another woman and identify as homosexual. Now that's enough about me. Let's hear about Brandi and her history when it comes to the idea of gender.
Hi, my name is Brandy Jones. I'm 68 years old. I identify... The short version would just be to say I'm a trans woman. The longer version would be to say, and it's a mouthful, that I'm a bisexual, male to female, post-operative transsexual. And I do like the term transsexual. I think there is a place for it in the transgender dialogue. I became aware and committed myself to a complete change of gender and change of sex to the degree that the surgeons could do that for me back in 1989. I transitioned. I was very fortunate that I got to transition at my place of work. The old standard transsexual layout.
And how old were you then?
In 89?
Yeah.
I was 41.
Okay.
So late in life was when I made the decision. Now, I had been aware, that something was wrong with me for a very long time. But many times, especially when you're a child, you don't understand why you're compelled to act in a certain manner. But to rejoin my later self, I started living full time. I took a month off from work, and I had breast implants at that time. I had already had years of counseling. I had already had years of removing through electrolysis facial hair and body hair. And so I took a month off and came back and proceeded to live my life full-time as a woman among the very same people that I'd worked with before. And I'm very grateful to the people of Medical City Ltd., which was their name at that time, for working with me and allowing me to stay, on the job. That was in 1995. In January of 2002, I went to Montreal, Canada, and had what is usually referred to as gender reassignment surgery at that time. And they gave me paperwork, etc., to say, that all my documents should be changed. Although back in '95, I'd went before a judge here in Dallas and presented my paperwork that I was in therapy and that I needed to have my name changed and my gender markers changed. And you sort of had to shop for a judge at that time in Dallas. And I had a lawyer who was just delighted. She wanted to work with the transgenders, and I was her very first person. So she didn't even charge me anything. I had some court costs to pay. So again, I've been so fortunate throughout my life to keep running into people that are willing to help me and work with me. So that was done in '95. I got the final surgery done in 2002. I came back, and my therapist said, well, you've got to come back. We had a group meetings that I'd done for years. She said, you need to come back for one more, sort of wrap it up. And I said, I've already told you I wasn't going to darken the doorway of a therapist ever again once I got what I wanted. She says, oh, please come on back. So I went back, had one last meeting with my group, and then it was adios. And like many people, I knew how I felt, and I knew what I wanted, but I didn't spend a lot of time studying gender theory, and I think most transsexual people don't.
Now, I don't mean to interrupt you, but were you going to mention that you were actually in the military previous to that?
Oh,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Like I said, from a very early age, I was into my mother's clothing, and the bras and the panties and all this when she wasn't home. And I was doing these sort of activities occasionally, once in a blue moon. And at the same time I was doing this, I was playing football. My dad put me in a boxing program. He thought I needed to toughen up. And I've got 4 Golden Gloves boxing trophies still in storage somewhere. Wow. And I think often there was a kid, I won't give his name, I whipped him 3 times. He was out of Amarillo, Texas. He was real little tough, and he really wanted to beat me. And every time over the space of 2 years that I fought that kid, I whipped him good. and I think now he's probably some 250-pound truck driver somewhere, and he would be horrified to find out that he was not only defeated by another kid, but a kid that went on to that is now a transsexual.
Oh man!
So I went to college. Started in '66. The Vietnam War was just kicking off real good. So one way to avoid getting drafted, because they were taking away student deferments, etc., was to join their ROTC department, which I did. It took me 5 years to get out of college. I almost outwitted myself because the war just kept going on and on and on. So I was just assuming I was going to go to Vietnam. So when I graduated and I got the bars pinned on. I was a brand new 2nd Lieutenant Infantry, and I had an ROTC scholarship. So I did 4 years active duty in the U.S. Army. I did my IOBC, which is your Infantry Officer's Basic course at Benning. And then I went to Fort Polk, where I trained troops for the better part of 4 years, most of these troops going to Vietnam. After I got out of the Army, I didn't know much what to do with myself, and most of the jobs I did would have been considered extremely manly jobs. I broke freight on a Teamster truck line. I drove heavy equipment on a dam project, although they were so desperate for employees out in the middle of nowhere. This is out in the Oklahoma Panhandle, that we actually did have a lot of women employees driving the heavy equipment. Right. And then I got into hospital security and eventually at Medical City. And that's pretty much my story in very condensed form.
How old were you when you, I guess, were first introduced to even the concept of being transgender or...
Okay, you don't know what's wrong with you when you're running around as a kid thinking, oh, it'd be fun to put on mother's clothing. But I don't think I was really aware of the transgender community until probably well up in my 30s. Now, I was aware of drag queens and cross-dressers, but that's a narrow, part of the transgender world. And at the time I started going out dressed and partying on Saturday night in 88, 89, the gay community down there, they weren't very well informed about transgender either. And to them, transgender meant drag queen or crossdresser. And they liked the drag queens because they made money for them and they appeared in their shows. They didn't like the crossdressers. I was told repeatedly, myself and others of my friends, that we were not welcomed in many of the gay clubs, especially the lesbian clubs. The lesbians really had a chip on their shoulder. And one of the most aggravating things that ever happened to me, I had a close transsexual friend. She'd already had her surgery. She was partying down at the station, as it was known at that time. It wasn't S4. And she invited me to come down and go to this birthday party. And I showed up, and I was dressed very nice. It was not, I was dressed business suit attire, had a nice little short wig on, and really looked good. And lined up, huge line around the block. When I got up, these two guys were sitting, and I thought, well, I had a fake ID, which I used to get in straight clubs. And I thought, well, I don't have to use that fake ID. This is a gay club. So I pulled out my real ID, Texas driver's license, and handed it to them. This is what they said, the exact words. We don't let your kind in here.
Oh, no.
And I had to take a walk of shame back past this line and half the line was straight people, because those clubs have always been very popular with straight couples that like to go down there and dance. So we've got all these straight people dressed in every sort of wild attire, not to mention all the gay boys wearing cut-off jeans and cowboy boots, etc. But they wouldn't let me in. So I held that rather against that club for many years. In fact, it's funny, I would walk by and give them the finger, and these people sitting, 10 years later, these people sitting inside taking the tickets are going, what the hell's wrong with her, So I sort of held a grudge for a while.
Oh.
I'm probably chasing, I chase rabbits a lot. I get off on my stories and away we go.
No,
but
it's
fine. I would like to say that I don't consider myself an authority on gender theory, etc. But I am an authority on my own life, and it's a unique perspective. And also I can say that in all those years that I've lived in the local transgender community and rubbed shoulders with some of them, I've seen things, and I've seen things that leads me to have some opinions on what's currently going on in the transgender world. And I'm not saying that I'm the big authority. And it's already been noted in magazines and books that sometimes the older gay people and older transgender people are rather resistant to some of the new things that are coming along. Okay. So I hope I don't just sound like an old fogey, but I think that everything perhaps at times needs to be questioned, and maybe not just jump on the bandwagon on everything. I've seen some people in the transsexual world that definitely made some mistakes and thought that they were one thing when they weren't.
So let's we're gonna get on that topic in just a moment, and I wanted to talk about this whole idea that's going on where it seems a lot of the younger community is trying to claim that that there are no biological differences between men and women, that it's a social construct.
Okay.
And I'm of the opinion that it is a mixture of the two. Like, maybe there are certain ways that society leads us into maybe certain occupations in some cases, or obviously there's separate men's and women's clothing department, that kind of thing. But I know for a fact that biological differences are inherent, like once you're
I
born,
have a
like even before you're born.
I have a quick response to that.
Okay.
I think that to a certain extent, when people say that, they're playing definitional word games.
Yeah.
If you study some of the gender theorists and people that write the books and everything, when they are talking about the words man and woman, they're relating that to gender exclusively. And I don't think those words exclusively, I think they can apply to sex. And in common conversation, they do apply to the two sexes that do exist. But usually, when you're talking the gender studies, etc., they use the term male and female for the sex or for sexual differences.
So yeah,
and the terms man and woman. That's the reason that when I went to gender conferences, I would have some of the really militant cross-dressers or transgenderists like Virginia Prince and her followers say, we're more women than you are. You know, I know you've had a sex change, but we're more women. They even claim to be more women than biological females. And the reason is because of the word woman. To them, woman just meant a gender construct in their head, or a construct that they lived out through their gender expression.
Okay.
So I think that they're playing definitional games there. I think that if they said there's no difference between male and female, which is how you interpreted it, then they don't have any support, because there is a biological differences.
Yeah.
We do have two sexes. Now, I know that people are going to say, well, what about intersex? What about people that are born instead of XX or XY, they're born XXX or X?
Yeah, and what from your point of view, what do you think, what do you feel should happen in those cases? Say
they've changed. The intersex problem was a problem. And again, not an authority, I'm just expressing what I know, what I believe to be true, is that the doctors were sort of screwing things up because they were looking at children with ambiguous genitalia, and they were deciding for the child and for the parents, oh, this child looks more like a woman, so we're going to do a little nip clip here, and we're going to make them appear like a woman. And now the emphasis seems to be on, let's let the child tell us later. Because in the first place, many of the children with ambiguous genitalia still had a sexual identity. They sometimes the testicles were up inside. Sometimes they did have the hormones of one sex or the other. And even if they didn't, most of these children at one point or another made the decision to be binary gender one way or the other. And it was the children that was saying, look, you know, the doctor fixed me to look like a girl, and I don't feel that way. I'm a little boy. And you're thinking, well, they should have left him alone. So it's my understanding that the doctors are delaying doing surgery. They're delaying pushing the child toward one gender identity, and they're waiting to let the child say, this is how I feel about it. That's my understanding. I don't know a whole lot about intersex. I do know that a lot of children were messed up and lives ruined because of people wanting to do that surgery. When it comes to sex change surgery or gender reassignment surgery, whatever you want to call it, I still like sex change surgery. I think that it's a phrase that's more right. They didn't operate on my gender. I'd already changed that myself. My gender identity was set. They operated on my body.
Right.
But I don't care. It was called gender reassignment surgery. Now people are calling it gender fulfillment surgery. I don't. It's the same surgery. Affirmation. It's the same surgery.
Okay.
And I am dead. As long as we're on children, it's my personal opinion that because this is something that you pretty much can't take back. I mean, it's a bridge that you really burned your bridges behind you once you have gender reassignment surgery.
Right.
So I am dead set against children under the age of 18 having it. They've got plenty of life left. If they, I would have been delighted if I would have known what was quote unquote wrong with me.
Right.
When I was to get that surgery at 19, 20, 21. They don't need it at 15 or 16. They can
or
wait a
they're
few
doing
years.
it as well, as far as hormone therapy goes. They're doing it pretty much as young as 9 years old now.
Yeah, well, even the hormones don't send you down the path totally one way. They do affect the body.
So Brandi, what I wanted to cover a little bit of is I feel we didn't cover the topics of biological sex versus gender identity, gender expression, and sexual preference. And you've read up on the
and gender itself.
And gender itself.
Yeah.
If you want to elaborate on those definitions or...
I'll give it a shot.
All right.
Sex is usually identified as male or female. When you use those words, that's usually the gender theorists are going to use male or female rather than man or woman. They usually use man or woman applying to gender. And gender is usually described as a cultural construct. Now, to the degree to which it's latched to the physical sex, that's debatable. And a lot of people think that gender really doesn't have much to do at all with, your physical sex. In addition to gender, of course, you've got the gender identity, and that's how you see yourself in your own mind. Okay. You've also got gender roles, which is sort of an old-fashioned term.
For gender,
but we've still, I think that we've still got gender roles. They've just changed a lot. But nobody likes to be told in this day and age that, your role is to wash the dishes and, and do this. It's sort of an old-fashioned way of thinking.
Stereotypes.
Yeah. So gender role isn't used as much. Now, gender comportment is. That's how you carry yourself. You dress, you move, you talk, you wave your hands, whatever that indicate gender.
And would that be, I guess that's related to masculinity versus femininity? Is that, because how does one determine, how exactly,
again,
you were talking about like the way you wave your hand.
And again, people, that's just, it's cultural. I mean, you can say, well, wearing high heels is more womanly. Right. But yet we all know if you're in South Borneo, the women there don't wear high heels, and they're still women. There's islands in which the men, South Seas islands, in which the men thought it was a great decorative masculine thing to see how small they can make their waist, and they wore they corseted themselves with wrapping things around them, etc. In our society, we'd say wearing a corset was more of a woman gender marker, and yet there are still corset enthusiasts in this day and age that are men. It's
and then sexual preference though as well.
Well,
that's a third component here.
Well, of course, sexual preference. You can be transgender, and still be considered heterosexual in your own mind. Yeah. Or gay or lesbian in your own mind, or gay, and it gets really tricky. It's definitional because you're thinking, well, this person used to be, this male to female transsexual used to be male, and he says this person is still saying, I'm still sexually attracted to women, therefore I'm a lesbian. Yeah. And they're saying, oh, wait a minute, but when you were a guy, if you were attracted, then you would say you were straight, and it just causes massive confusion. Now, I've had people say, well, if a person is a transsexual, male to female, and they identify as a lesbian and they're attracted to women, it seems like that was a long way to go just to get the same thing. Yeah. And I'm saying, but you're not getting the same thing in the same way.
And there is
you have different sexual equipment, and therefore it feels different, and what you're doing is different.
Now, there's also something that I don't feel is covered very much in, say, like I don't know if amongst the trans community, if you've experienced, or if you've met a lot of female to male transitioners. Have you? Okay.
Yes, we had
what I've what I've noticed, and I feel like it's a pretty controversial thing to bring up, so I don't exactly question it on the internet, is a lot of them, they will be attracted to women. Like when they're still a woman, I guess outwardly they identify as a lesbian or homosexual,
Right.
what have you. And
Maybe a butch lesbian.
yeah. And then once they start injecting testosterone, they suddenly become attracted to men or even other trans men. I don't know if you've noticed that at all.
To tell you the truth, I have not quizzed. I used to attend our gear meetings when we had them on a more regular basis. Of course, they may have started up. They may be sitting out there. We're still having them. And we always had a nice contingent of trans men there.
Yeah.
And I just thought they were great.
Yeah.
I found it very easy to relate to them as guys because that's really what they appeared to be.
Right.
And they acted like guys, and I loved them as guys. Now, but who they were attracted to, it really never came up. When you're at one of those meetings, they're basically, you're eating cake and coffee or whatever, and having a pizza, and you really don't go around saying, okay, who are you sexually attracted to? Because you don't do that in any segment of society, I don't think. Nor did I care about whether they had any sexual reassignment on their genitalia, which is much more difficult, much more expensive, and much more painful, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
For the female to male transsexual.
Right.
Although when I was up in Canada, when I arrived the very first night, just walking in, not knowing what to expect, they put you out on this little. I went to Dr. Menard in Montreal.
Okay.
And they hold you up in this, it was like a mansion out on this island. And it was like a little halfway house or something for you to stay.
Oh, that sounds nice.
They had cooks there to cook you food. It was fabulous. And so I walked in and there's 4 trans guys there, Yeah. And the person that was really my best friend the whole time I was up there was a trans guy who had come back to have additional surgery, basically to make himself look a little more realistic. Now, he already had all the equipment, but people that were close to him said that they, wanted him to do more.
Yeah, and I guess one other thing that we should clarify is that a lot of people who don't really follow the whole transgender community or cultural phenomenon that seems to be really out in the open right now is that when somebody is transitioning, they were assigned female at birth, transitioning to male, that would be trans male.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
it's a lot easier.
And then assigned male at birth, transitioning to female.
I think one of the reasons they want to use trans man, trans woman is because if you start saying, oh, I'm a post-operative transsexual, it starts dividing the community up. And too many people would say, oh, they're trying to say you're superior to me because you've had more work on your body. And I think that should be, but you have these conflicts, you have these turf wars constantly. And so they're trying to, that's why they sort of threw out that umbrella term transgender for everybody to cut down on these damn turf wars and who's better than who and who's more woman than who. Now, actually, it surprised me that your impression was that these guys who had transitioned to men were now more interested in men because it was always. It
might be a smaller, it's
it was
smaller
always,
percentage, but people, I don't think that a lot of people are aware that this does actually happen.
It was always, it was always my impression that most of the trans men or transsexual males were interested in women. That was always my impression, and might be wrong. And I knew some of them definitely, I knew some of them that were married. They were married to women that, already had kids and stuff like that. So, obviously, But I don't know. Perhaps there's surveys out on this topic.
Right.
I had always assumed that most of the trans men were interested in women, and now you got me thinking. I really don't know.
Really, no, I did. I read an article today about how it was a person who identified as a lesbian and then realized they wanted to transition to being a male, and then it was maybe like a year after they started taking testosterone, and they then realized like they identified then as bisexual. But they were practically ignoring women. Like it just didn't do it.
And
of
course,
them.
as I've said,
it can, like,
in
that's
the
what,
local groups, I never knew who had actually had the so-called bottom surgery, nor was I interested, because I'm thinking, well, I'm not having sex with this individual. They look perfectly great to me.
Okay.
And so many of them say, oh, this is, I've got to the point at which I'm happy. People accept me as a guy. I have a good sex life with whoever. Okay. So I don't feel I need to do, the complete surgery, which is so costly and so painful.
Okay, so this is another kind of hot topic amongst the trans community is, well, like what you were talking about earlier, you were saying that the really strong, I guess, feminist type were being, they were against the whole trans thing. But what is happening, and you and I had discussed this before, is that lesbian women, or women who prefer to be with other women, they might come across people on, say, dating applications, like apps on their phone, or different ways, like social groups, meeting other women with the intention of meeting other women. And whenever they find out that, say, a trans woman has not had bottom surgery, so they still have a penis, all of that going on, and they then decide they're like, no, thank you, I don't want to date you, and then they're seen as transphobic in a way.
No, I think everybody should have the right to date, love, have sex with whoever they want to, and I don't think that you should have to say, oh, okay, I have to go, I have to date this person because I don't want anybody to think that right. I'm against this group.
So what you're saying is that genitals do matter in a way. They do.
I think that if they matter to the individual,
right?
Yeah, I don't think they should. If somebody says, "Oh, okay, I can't do this," and we were discussing this earlier off camera, that I've always felt in my personal life that it was unethical not to tell anybody I was dating or getting close to. I just think it's ethical to say, look, I'm transgendered, I'm a transsexual. Therefore, if you became serious about this person later on, right, it could cause a lot of heartbreak, to decide that, we're in love, we want to get married, and then you're thinking, oh, maybe I should tell them now, and then everything blows up. Yeah. So, but that's up to the that's up to the individual.
Would you feel that leads into like I said, we are talking about controversial topics today.
And
this
things
leads into maybe some of the acts of violence anyway that might happen that you were gonna talk about earlier. You wanted to sympathize and say or acknowledge that.
I have been told from some of the female to male transsexuals that everything was happy peasy as long as they identified as a butch lesbian. But when they told the community, oh, I'm going to transition, I'm transgendered now, I'm going to have a certain amount of surgery, some in that community basically told them they were traitors. They were traitors to women, and that they shouldn't be doing this. And I think that's a bad position to put anybody.
Right. But
I think now, as far as I was going to bring up some of the horrible anti-transsexual media that was put out in the 70s and the 80s.
Really?
Yes, primarily by militant feminists, and many times militant lesbian feminists. And this is carried over to a certain extent even today. I remember when I first started going out down in the neighborhood that some of the clubs that were least likely to let me in were the lesbian clubs. And I never could understand where this hostility came from. But it was put out there, and I've got some quotes here if I could read.
Go ahead, and I want to hear the quotes.
I have a great book here, which I'd recommend. If you could only read one book
go ahead and
on
show.
transgender, it's Transgender History by Susan Stryker. She is a transgender historian. At the time this book was published, she was teaching gender studies at Harvard, which in my book means she's a pretty smart cookie. And this is a great book. I've learned a lot from it. And one of the chapters over here has to do with, let me flip over real quickly, feminist transphobia. It pointed out that at the very first gay pride parade in 1972 devolved into a fist fight between some gay men and feminist lesbians who were carrying signs. The signs read "Off the Pricks," and they definitely were opposed to having any drag queens or transgender people at all in a gay parade, which seems very strange to us now. And in 1973, they had two gay pride parades in San Francisco. One that had drag queens, and the other that didn't, because they felt that this mocked women.
It was that segregated, really? Like
yes.
That? Wow.
And it said, an emerging discourse in feminism that held all male to female transsexuals to be, by definition, violators of women, since they represented an, quote, unwanted penetration, unquote, into women's space.
I like the wordplay there.
It was equated. Transsexualism was equated with rape. Now, at that time, they were just blissfully unaware that there was any such thing as female to male transsexuals, and the few that they were aware of, they held that they were just dupes of the patriarchal society, that they had been duped into thinking the only way they could count was to turn into a man, and it was just more representation.
Okay. So the next topic I want to get onto is atheism. Okay,
we'll get back to this a little bit.
Yeah, we can definitely get back to that for sure.
Because I wanted to get into Janice Raymond's 1979 book, The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the She-Male, whose her philosophy or position echoes down to this day, and it caused us a lot of problems. Let's talk about atheism as it relates to the transgender world.
Okay, so I guess I should mention that I am personally, I'm currently president of the oldest atheist organization in North Texas. Is that right?
The oldest in North Texas.
And that is Metroplex Atheists. And I do want to point out that any of the opinions or views expressed within this video are not conducive to what Metroplex Atheists. This is just us having a conversation.
They're not authorized. They're not Metroplex Atheist positions.
No, this is not me endorsing everything that comes out of our mouths.
The opinions and ideas of these two people and I also am a member of the Metroplex Atheist, and I am also on the board of officers. I am the secretary, although not a particularly good one. I still try.
Whatever.
They make fun of me.
So the reason that was relevant is because a lot of times in these conversations about gender and sexuality and all of this, even if you were raised, well, especially if you happen to be raised in a religion, and then you realize these things about yourself, then you start to question a lot about the religion itself. I mean, at least that's the case for a lot of young people. They're like, okay, so homosexuality is wrong, or it's wrong for me to change my body, or all of that. And so they really start to question religion itself, especially, the region we're in, North Texas, Christianity is the prevailing religion in America, pretty much. So you start to question that, and then a lot of them drop religion altogether and declare that they are in fact atheism or atheists.
Yes, I think we have a disproportional percentage of the total atheist community from the LGBT community.
Well, we have
They're not matching. I mean, you say the LGBT community. I don't know what it is, 5%. If it's 5%, then it should be 5% of atheists, but it's not. I think it's disproportionately high in the atheist community. I would like to say that being very openly transsexual, although it's not printed on my forehead, it's not the first thing I bring up or tell people. In fact, I'm always surprised when I mention it to people and they're shocked. And people I've known for years, and I sort of assume they knew, but they didn't.
Right.
But I have found that the atheist community, especially the local atheist community, to be extremely accepting of LGBT people. I can't think of a person that I've met at Metroplex Atheists that said, look, I've just got a real problem with this, this seems very strange and it makes me feel very uncomfortable. That conversation just hasn't taken place. Now, on the other hand, my acceptance by the transgender community for being an atheist isn't as good.
Really?
I went to one meeting one time with a group that was very short-lived, and they met at a little bar, and they started talking about what church they went to. What church you go, what church you go. And they came to me, and I said, well, actually, I'm an atheist. But I said, but I'm a good person. I made a little joke. I said, I'm on the side of the angels, even though I don't think the angels exist. Not a smile. They were just horrified. They were just like, oh, my goodness. Well, I found out later that organization that had been set up by a nice Jewish transsexual, that she'd set it up as a faith-based transgender, but nobody told me, and I guess she just assumed there weren't any atheist transgenders to spoil their little tea party. Also, I've noticed it hasn't exactly went over in some of the larger organizations either, like GEAR and
what is GEAR?
That's gender education and resources.
Okay.
And it's probably been the most long-lasting because it's actually sponsored by the Gay and Lesbian Center. In other words, it's got the resources to put the money and the backing so that it won't go down the tubes, although it goes up and down. It depends. You've always got to have a strong leader or somebody that will step in and say, okay, this is what we're doing. When we don't have strong leadership, then it fades off and there's small little activity. But that's one of the reasons of the main two that I'm not very much involved with the local transgender groups anymore, is because number one, I didn't want to live in the transgender bubble. Or sometimes I've even referred to it as the transgender ghetto. I've always lived my life out in the quote unquote real world, although it's impossible not to be in the real world. Almost all my close friends, are just straight people. I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of worked out that way. And the second big reason, of course, some of my closest transsexual friends have died. One died of complications of AIDS many years ago, and she was one of my very best friends. And so I lost friends due to disease and things like that. And they really haven't been replaced by any other transgender people. And the second big reason, of course, is because, to me, the local transgender community is just totally swamped in religion. We had a dinner one time. Where we're going to have our little dinner? Well, it's going to be at a church. The big transgender group over in Fort Worth meets exclusively in a church. And when they march in their parade, they're marching as much for Jesus as they are for their transgender position. The last day of remembrance I went to was at the Cathedral of Hope. They always want to have it at the Cathedral of Hope. Now, to be fair to them, they tried to put on a non-denominational, not religious remembrance ceremony where you come and you light the candles in the name of the dead that have been so horribly slaughtered during the year are read. And on this occasion, one of the speakers was clergy, and it was a transgender, lovely black transgender woman. She even wears a collar. I've forgotten her name. she gets up there, and I'm thinking, okay, wonder how this is going to go. Well, you know how it went. Preacher's got to preach, and she did. She immediately launched off into about the devil and how all these people that have been slaughtered were actually in a better place now. And they were actually here with us in the benches, and she wanted us to turn and say hello to all of our departed friends. And it just curdled me because I'm thinking, she's turning these monsters that slaughtered these people in the most horrible of ways into agents of the Lord. You know, they sent them on to the better place. And then she made this statement. She said, you know, your life doesn't really begin until you die.
What?
Which, even as even as if I was a Christian, I would take offense to, because I'm thinking, wait a minute. All the love we've shown for our families and our parents, the tears we've cried over people's graves, the love we've had for a friggin' dog, the patriotism we've shown for our country as service in the Army, none of that counts. None of that is living. It doesn't start till you're dead. To me, it was like saying, you know, you never can really jump into the water until you die of dehydration in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It just didn't make sense. And it was obviously overlooking the fact that we were remembering something like 150 people from all over the world.
Right.
One transgender lady had been killed in Turkey. And I'm thinking, what are the chances of this person? Well, there's a chance, but chances are if she identified with a religion, it would probably be that she was Muslim. And there were others. I'm thinking, you got 150 people that were slaughtered in the most, because they always give little descriptions, and I don't even want to go into it, but many times they mutilate these transgender victims to show their complete disdain for them, and that they're not even considered human in their eyes. So, of all these people, I'm thinking, surely you realize that even out of 150 people just random in the United States, you're going to have some that are non-Christian.
Yeah.
Now, what does your theology say about what happens when a non-Christian person dies? They go to hell. That's what your theology is. I'm thinking, so don't tell us that all these transgender people are all having this wonderful life in heaven, and she should have just stayed off the religious topic totally, but she didn't. She just couldn't help herself. And I was aggravated. I thought about making a scene or walking out, and I thought, no, everybody would be mad at me in my local group. So I talked to some of the other transgender people that were there about my extreme displeasure with this speaker. And this one lady said, well, do you think that when you die, that's just all there is? You know, you just cease to exist? And I said, yes, that's my belief. And she says, you know, I think the same thing too. So I think, oh, here's another person that's an atheist that just isn't telling anybody.
So was there an opportunity at all to actually talk to the speaker?
I could have, but I didn't really want to because I was mad and I was afraid I would really unwind.
That's understandable.
I did talk to a lot of the people in gear about how I thought it was so inappropriate, and they all looked at me like, well, you're crazy, you know, why are you, you know, you're embarrassing us, you know, because they're all on board. We've got one transgender woman there that's she's still a Southern Baptist preacher. And it's just everywhere you look, I'm running into religiosity.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we march, the Metroplex Atheists have taken to marching in the gay pride parades. We did our first parade back in about 2012, 2011. Now, when I pitched this idea, because they had been marching in the 4th of July parade in Arlington, and I said, we need to march in the gay pride parade. And everybody says, why? Why would we want to do that? We're all straight. I said, do you realize how many church floats are in the gay pride parade?
Right.
And they said, church floats? We didn't know there were church floats in a gay pride parade. Why would they be church floats? And I said, well, I counted 13 last year. 13. And I said, they need to have an alternative. And so that's the reason we started marching. And again, we're a group that's primarily straight people, and they just had the time of all of their life. They really enjoyed marching in the parade and still do. And we've also expanded to the Fort Worth Gay Pride Parade.
Right.
But I don't know what to do about it. I do know that, about 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I went to a little outing that a gal threw, and she called it LGBT and Atheist Social. And she's affiliated with the Dallas Freethinkers. And she said she hasn't had much luck getting many people to come. And Ruth and I, my roommate, we went over and had drinks at them at some little bar there on Maple. And it was delightful. So I'm going to keep supporting her because it's a long road to hoe, because so many people in the LGBT community think that that's a good way to acceptance. It's sort of a political move. Oh, if we can present ourselves as good Christians, then the general society will warm to us a little better. And we'll say, oh, you know, we go to Cathedral of Hope, and it's the largest gay church in the United States, although they no longer bill themselves as a gay church because their outreach is to people of all sorts.
Right, right.
But I find it very disheartening that so many of the LGBT people and the transgender people still cling so tenaciously to a religion that has so much disdain for them. Now they can run to their gay churches and pretend that traditional Christianity and Orthodox Christianity doesn't condemn them, but it does. And I've seen, you know, you can work almost any position with the Bible, but there's just, let's face it, those verses are there, and they condemn LGBT people. Although there is one verse in there where I think there's a eunuch who's told by somebody that he should come on down to the church, and they would be accepting. And a eunuch is about the closest thing the Bible comes to transgender people, because it's really not addressed.
Right.
Not.
Yeah, that's that's potentially a really long conversation on that.
And you know, some of the people in our own organizations have said, I think it was Zach that said we should reach out to the LGBT community because he depicted it as low-hanging fruit. He thought it would be easier to, and again, I want to emphasize that the atheist community here is really not into proselytizing, because we know there are so many people out there that are atheist. All we really want to do is get them out of the closet. Most atheists are in churches. They're sitting in church pews week after week because they're scared. You know, they own a hardware store in some small Oklahoma town, and they know if they come out as an atheist, they'll never sell another hammer or saw in that hardware store, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Did you want to get back onto the what were the quotes that you were wanting to read
well,
earlier?
I have one of the interesting topics that we've been kicking around and we thought would be interesting is this drive to make laws that people have to use certain pronouns.
Right, and I think that the original place where a lot of us had heard about this was, for example, Bill C-16 in Canada.
Yes.
Did you happen to look anything up about that?
The only thing I know is that they're wanting to make it illegal not to use these pronouns when addressing certain transgender people. And I have to say certain transgender people because there's some transgender people like myself that worked long and hard to be called she and her.
Okay.
So... And to come up and call me Z or Zir or whatever is something I don't require and I don't want.
I know that there are actually a lot of people, whether it be online or even when you're talking to people in person, they think it's hyperbole. They think we're making a big deal out of nothing because they'll never enforce this law. But I even came across an actual Twitter post from the Halton Police Department that's in Ontario, Canada. And great, I mean, like they even had their logo was switched. It had rainbow colors. They're celebrating Pride Month. But since this law has been passed, now they're really enforcing this idea. It says if you're not sure what pronoun somebody uses, just ask, what are your preferred pronouns? And then it had a chart. It says, and this was posted on June 28th of 2017, and they had a chart that says handy guide to pronouns. So they have he, his, him. He went to the store to buy himself a hat. She, her, her. She went to the store to buy herself a hat. And then we get into Z, here. Yes. Z went to the store to buy herself a hat. Z, zim, zir. Z went to the store to buy zirself a hat. And then they, their, them. They went to the store to buy themselves a hat. And I mean, it goes on forever. I looked up even other pronouns. It just keeps on just multiplying. We have per and purse and te and han, rim. I'm making up alien words at this point, right?
Here's the problem as I see it. The problem is, where are the visual cues that a person would want these pronouns applied to them? This is the cover of Time, beyond he or she. They have this lovely lady named Marie right there. Now, Marie identifies as queer and gender nonconforming.
Okay.
I have no idea whether she would want any special pronouns applied to her. And I don't see how you could just look at her face and decide that. She looks, to all extent and purposes, to be a lovely young woman. I don't, gender nonconforming is rather a vague term.
Right.
And queer really no longer means gay.
Right.
It really means you're sort of anti-heteronormative. And again, that's a slippery term. So how is Mr. Police Officer or any others,
according to the police department, you're just supposed to ask, Brandi.
I know, but if we have to ask a person that looks like that, I guarantee you that there's another million young ladies out there that look very similar to her that identify as a woman and identify as female. And we're going to have to literally ask everybody that we meet coming down the sidewalk. It doesn't seem, at this time...
It doesn't seem practical.
It doesn't seem practical. And I have a quote from Susan Stryker on this very term, which I thought was interesting. And it's about gender-neutral pronouns. It's not that long. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, appropriate use of gender-neutral pronouns can be tricky. The practice often works well within transgender communities, where many people understand what's being said, but it can get confusing for outsiders. Changes in language structure usually happen very slowly, and pronouns are among the linguistic elements most resistant to change. Let me repeat that again. It bears repeating. Pronouns are among the linguistic elements most resistant to change. So trying to speed up a change of usage can sometimes sound forced or strange. Some transgender people, often those who have worked very hard to attain a gender status other than the one assigned to them at birth, take offense when gender-neutral pronouns rather than the appropriate gendered ones are applied to them because they perceive this usage as a way that others fail to acknowledge their attained gender. And I would also point out that, as I've said before, I like the pronouns she and her applied to me. Now, there is no law requiring anybody to use she and her. If somebody is told, an associate or somebody that comes into contact with me, well, that's a male to female transsexual. And the person goes, well, I just don't approve of them. I'm just going to stick it to her and call her he every time I can't run to a police officer and say, go arrest that person because they called me he.
They could be fined, though. I mean, it's a growing thing because we mentioned Bill C-16 and Canada, and people are like, oh, that's Canada. Why are we worried about it? There is a very specific example I found about a 5th grade teacher in Oregon where they won a $60,000 settlement because their coworkers did not use the pronouns they and them. How do you feel about that?
I'm against fining people for not using these things. You're trying to cram something down their throat.
It's compelled speech.
Exactly. It's getting mean. And I think that when these pronouns are needed, because that's how words arrive. We need a certain word, so we start using it. There have been occasions where we'll invent words that they catch on.
They naturally catch on.
But for something like this, for something so elementary to the language as pronouns, I think that we should give it a little time and see if these things can naturally arrive and evolve. And I'm not dead set against them. I'm dead set against the law enforcement and the government getting into the act, because every time you invite the government in, you learn to regret it. It's sort of like the churches wanting the government to help them, and I'm thinking beware what you wish for, because once the government gets in, things have a way of backfiring on you.
Yeah, and for example, this is the whole Bill C-16 thing that's happening. They don't necessarily they actually go on to define in the Canadian Human Rights Codes what the definitions of gender, identity, and expression are. And it says, and furthermore, discrimination happens when a person experiences negative treatment or impact, intentional or not, because of their gender, identity, or expression. So the or not part, I feel, would be an issue. Intentional or not.
Yeah, because a lot of the people that are claiming that they're non-binary, transgenders.
Right, but you were talking about
you can't other than perhaps having a vaguely androgynous dress and manner. And many times they don't even have that. You don't know. I can't read people's minds. And we just can't go walking down the sidewalk asking everybody we come up to, what's your gender status? What's your gender status? What's your gender status?
But whenever you said whenever you were at work, you didn't make a huge deal if somebody happened to misgender you. Like when you first came back.
No, because I was delighted that how willing my coworkers that had known me as a guy all these years were willing to try to get the pronouns right. And occasionally they would get them wrong simply because it would slip their mind. And occasionally they would call me by my former name. And I'm thinking,
and how would,
well, of course they did. Because even my mother sometimes does that, because they've known me for 10, 15 years as one name, and I come back a month later. I was very grateful for the fact that they tried so hard. They didn't want to hurt my feelings. They wanted to get with the program, and they did. But then again, I had huge gender comportment. It was easy. I mean, I didn't have any problem with pronouns from people that had never met me before. Working, when they walked up, they saw a woman and they used the pronouns that we normally use applying to women. I think that's the main thing. And another thing I wonder is, in all my years in Dallas, I've never met a single person that said, no, I'm not a man or a woman. I'm somewhere in the middle. This thing that seems to be so popular among the millennials now is not anything that ever cropped up in any of our transgender clubs or meetings. We never met a single person that said, I want you to call me by these new pronouns. So I'm just thinking, if this has been around all these years, where's it been?
The thing is, as we talked about this a little bit before, we're kind of in a new cultural era where, hello YouTube, we can actually, a single individual can have their own channel and express all these ideas that they have about being non-binary or gender neutral, and thousands, even millions of people, young people, especially very impressionable young people.
Facebook says they now have 60 different identities and growing that you can sort of choose from.
Right. Like, where does it end? I mean, honestly, like, is it going to end with the pronouns? It's not only impractical.
I would like to point out first that this feeling of not having a gender is very common for people when they really don't know what's going on.
Okay.
I have a quote in here from it was a little newspaper article that she wrote in a local gay newspaper. She'd just come out to San Francisco from New York. She was living in the Tenderloin, and she wrote this touching letter about how sort of feeling lost she was, and she was socializing with, because all the transgenders of them, they were mainly hookers. You know, the Tenderloin's a bad area of San Francisco, and they were mainly sex workers. And she'd come out there, and she was working in a hotel that catered to transgender sex workers, basically. And she wrote this letter saying how she didn't feel that she really had a gender. Now, that feeling of not having a gender or not fitting in is more common among people that ultimately settled on a binary than people realize. And we've always had people that said, well, I sort of feel like a third gender. Even people that went ahead and presented either as man or woman many times feel that, you know, it's the best fit they could have, but they still, the term third sex has been floating around for some time.
Yeah.
But splitting it into 6 zillion categories, I think to a certain extent this is young people. And I've got another quote from the writer of this article in Time magazine. And the quote, after discussing all these varying identities, this person, the author, writes, when it comes to the array of lesser known identities young people are embracing, the big question is whether this is just kids experimenting or whether it reflects true variance that has long existed but went unexpressed in past generations. The answer may be both. But he does point out that it could be, and I believe a certain segment of it, not everybody, but a certain segment really is young people experimenting or delighting in the idea that they can be different, that they can inhabit an exotic category. Now, what's really gonna show the degree of that they really believe it is going to be longevity. That's one of
yeah, but once you get
that's one of the things that the therapist always applied to us was, and that's the reason they tried to slow people down from jumping into sex surgery, is they wanted to see if this was something that could continue for months or years, this feeling, or if it went away, or if you decided to jump to something else. And because so many of these are very young people, 18, 19, 20 years old, and sometimes younger, I think it remains to be seen. And I'm open to the idea. You know, I think Brave New World. I mean, it's fine. I don't want to.
Okay,
I don't want to. I don't want to be like the. You know, I'm sure people. You're just an old fogey. You're an old time binary transsexual. You don't want anything to change or be different. And that's not the case at all. The case is that I know sometimes people lie to themselves. If you're going to lie to somebody, I think the common person you lie to is yourself. And I've seen that people that were binary trans lie to themselves about things. I had a friend, this friend of mine that I said died of AIDS complications. She had her sex change up in Canada, the same place I did. And we both had a friend that lived with her at the time. And he was, I use he because thinking back, that's the way it seems to me now, was a cross-dresser and kept swearing that she wanted to have the sex change surgery and go all the way, blah, blah, blah. Well, when my friend got back from Canada, only been back about 2 weeks, she said, do you want to see what this really looks like? She says, I'm all beat up and blue-black and everything's sort of swollen, but you can still get the idea. Well, I went in and I knew her well enough that we could do this. And I said, wow, really are beat up, but, they did it. They did it. That's really amazing. And I turned to our mutual friend.
And this was before your own surgery?
This was before my own. And I went to the same doctor 10 years later after she had died.
Right.
And this friend who had always sworn that, I want to have this surgery too, and I'm really gender dysphoric, and this is the only thing that can make me happy. Well, I looked at her face and the blood drained out. Literally, she looked like she was going to faint. It scared the shit out of her. And I'm thinking, you're never going to have this surgery. You've just come face to face with reality. And you were telling this little tale, and you were having a good time telling everybody you were transsexual. And I'm glad, because the worst thing you want to do is have this surgery and then decide, oh, I've made a horrible mistake.
Yeah. So do you think that speaking it out loud actually made her realize kind of the seriousness of the situation?
I think actually seeing the results right there in front of her sort of brought her to the realization, because she continued to go out and cross-dress and have a good old time. Okay. And so I'm not saying, oh, I'm superior because some people will go through the operation. No, not at all. Right. I think people should find what works for them. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that live perfectly happy lives, and at one time they were called transgenderists, and these are people that live full-time as women or as men, and they never have any surgery. In some cases, they don't take hormones, but they present themselves as women, and they live full-time as women, and they're happy, and that's all they need. And I'm thinking, yes, that's appropriate if it works for you. Plus, it's easier. You haven't gone through all these monetary expenses, all this pain, to end up with something that you may decide is horrible. I know cross-dressing friends, and I think they're delightful people. I think they've hit a niche that they're happy with, and they're happy being a cross-dresser. And in some cases, I'm not even sure if cross-dressing is truly should be classified as transgender, but we have such a umbrella out there anymore that we just pitched over everybody.
Well, the thing is,
but if they're happy doing this, that's fine. And they say, and the cross-dressers I know that came to Gear, delightful people. Yeah. Some of them have been doing this for 30 or 40 years. I mean, like old time cross-dressers. And when you come to the drag queens, some drag queens, now we throw the transgender banner over the drag performers too, but I've had a lot of drag performers say, no, I really don't identify as being transgender. I'm a gay man, and I do a performance art, and I'm very good at it. Yeah. And I entertain people, and I'm very good at putting on this artificial persona, and I go out there. Other drag queens, we've got one in particular that I think she's still working at the S4 Rose Room, and she's a transsexual. Right. But she does drag also. So she's a transsexual that does drag. And of course they're really not the same thing. I've talked to people, they say, well, do you ever go down to the neighborhood and how do they accept you? And I said, it's really interesting. If I go down in just my usual jeans and t-shirt and here I am. Well, everybody says, oh, there's a lesbian. If I go down all dolled up, like I used to, put on a big wig, wear the glam makeup, wear a real tight dress, super high heels, everybody goes, oh, it's a drag queen. Mm-hmm. If I go up, like I did one time, I went into the bar that had previously been the Blue Parrot, which at one time, many, many years ago, was the big drag bar in town. Okay. And I walked in there just for old time's sakes. I hadn't been in there in years. And it was now sort of a rough, tough guy bar. And I was wearing a business attire. I just come from work, come from Medical City. I was dressed very nice, light makeup, hair done real very nice, wearing a little business suit and heels. And I walked in there and I walked up to the bar, and the guy's just like, and I said, I think I want a Coors Light. And he said, lady, do you know where you are? Do you know what kind of bar you just walked into? And I said, yeah. I said, it's a gay bar, right? I guess he thought I was going to run screaming out the door, know. So so one person thought I was just a straight lady. Yeah. Another group thought I was a drag queen. And another group thought I was a lesbian, all based upon just the most casual changes in outer appearance. Yeah. And I'm still.
But you didn't take offense to the fact that
no, not at all.
Misgender you or mis.
Well, I still take offense at how some of the gay men in the neighborhood, their disdain for transgenders. One time, one of the last times I went down there, and I decided to just have fun, do more of the draggy look, and the ultra tight dress and everything. And I had a few too many drinks, and I was walking on some crooked concrete, and I keeled over. Whoa, took a good little hit and proceeded to cut my knee open, and I'm bleeding, and I've got blood running down the hose, and I'm trying to get back to my feet. And we've got all these gay fellas standing around where they were doing car pickup or something, people walking by me. Not one person said, may I help you up? Or sorry you fell, or anything. They went out of their way to be disdainful of the stupid drunk drag queen that just fell over. You know, good enough for you.
No, I've experienced myself the discrimination amongst the very outwardly gay men. Say like,
oh yeah,
on the dance floor or anything. They're like, "You're lesbian. What are you doing here?" And
exactly.
I remember
and I don't think this. I don't
I
think
got right in his face.
I don't think the straight universe realizes how many frigging turf wars have gone on. The LGBT community has never been one big happy family. It is just isn't. Yeah. And I think they're bliss. And of course, they try to present this unified face, but
Howdy,
it's
we're back.
Really not. We were just discussing what we're going to discuss next, and I wanted to get back to the idea, or to mention, because you know we've had disagreements perhaps with what people would discern as the more modern or up-to-date transgender theories, etc. But we want to remind everybody that the persecution and of transgender people is very real. The latest statistics that I saw, I believe, was that some 27 transgenders had been murdered in the previous year. And that was up from, I believe, 14 from about 2 years before that. So in the space of about 3 years, we had a doubling of transgender murders here in the United States. And so I would encourage everybody to find a Day of Remembrance ceremony that you like. As I think I've already mentioned, I didn't particularly appreciate the going to a church to have one, but the last one I went to was by the Black trans men, had a Remembrance Day ceremony at the Legacy of Love Monument there at the entry to the Cedar Springs neighborhood, and it was quite nice. Okay. And so I would encourage people to do that, participate in these things. And I would also encourage people just not to get so angry about these issues. The world's changing, different things are coming along, and if you think, oh, that group's crazy, well, I would encourage you to go out there and have some dialogue with people. Right. Talk to them, try to work things out. It might change your perspective, it might change their perspective. But I see more and more of this. We're right, and we're going to slug those people over there that are wrong, and we're going to bash them in the head. And it really makes me sad that some of the people that are acting this way are on the liberal progressive side, which is where I see myself. And I've seen parades that I was thinking about. You know, they say, we're going to have a parade supporting thus and thus. And I think, well, that would be nice to go down there and campaign for that. And then I find out that a bunch of people with black masks on carrying clubs showed up. Well, when people show up wearing masks and don't want to show their face and they're carrying a big club, you know they're wanting to do something that's not good. Yes. And I don't want to be associated with people that want to push forward their agenda by turning over cars and burning them, or hitting somebody, or beating them up. That is just the wrong approach. It is going to hurt your cause more than help it.
Yeah, and a lot of times that is actually a completely separate entity in itself. It's they call themselves Antifa, which, ironically enough, it's supposed to be anti-fascist. Mm-hmm. And I feel... they're anti-fascist, so they go out and act like fascists. Yes, that's exactly what's happening at a lot of these, especially in colleges and things, when they don't approve of what kind of speakers might be showing up. And
I recounted a little while ago when we were off camera that recently in Dallas, they had a group of these right-wing nuts all carrying their assault rifles and dressed in camo, and they showed up across the street from a mosque. And that wasn't doing anything. And pretty soon here come I call them the liberal progressive ninjas, all dressed in black, carrying clubs and face masks, and they showed up. So evidently they were going to teach the gun toters
through physical violence.
Yeah, through physical violence.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, well, in the first place, I was thinking, this doesn't make sense. You don't bring a club to a gunfight. But so the imam of the mosque, he didn't want any violence between these two groups. So he went across the street to see if anybody would be willing to sit down, let's go to a Denny's and talk and break bread and discuss this. Well, guess which group went with the imam? The right-wingers, the guys with the guns, sat down and talked. The black hooded ninjas, went, oh, phooey on you, there's no fighting here, and they stalked off. So I thought, that's pretty bad when the group that would be described as the right-wingers were the more reasonable and that were willing to sit down with the imam and talk. And there was coverage on this on the local stations. And they had actually changed their attitudes a little bit about the Muslims that attended that mosque. Mm-hmm. So I find it very depressing that there are so many people on all sides of the spectrum that are willing to settle, their differences by punching people or hitting people. And I would also point out that it just doesn't take physical violence to hurt people. Words hurt. Mm-hmm. And many times people organize campaigns against people because they've expressed the wrong opinion or said something they didn't agree with. So they mount some sort of campaign to have everybody swamp them, with hateful emails and hateful statements. And sometimes this can really cause damage to the people that are under attack. Mm-hmm. So I'm just appealing to people to talk with transgenders and for transgenders to talk with one another. And I know that this has been a revelation to me. I didn't know of some of these modern movements. So I'm going to make every effort to re-engage with the local transgender clubs and people, because I want to find out. I would really like to meet some of these kids that considers themselves gender fluid. I want to understand them better. I want to get a feeling for how they view these identities and how they arrived at the conclusion that they are.
Right.
And again, if I express doubt, it's not just because I want to be right or say, oh, those crazy kids. It's because I'm concerned. I've seen people make mistakes and think they were one thing when they really weren't. And I want them to have good and happy lives, and I want us to live in harmony and blah, 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 and world peace.
when you talk about that, are you speaking of maybe somebody who they realize at one point that they are transgender, and then they suddenly realize that wasn't really their cup of tea?
Exactly.
And they need compassion too.
Some people, what they needed was they wanted a tribe. They wanted people that were accepting of them. And sometimes it's very tempting to say, oh, I'm going to cross-dress so I can be in with these people because they're such a minority that they're going to all hang together.
I'm talking about people who even go so far as taking hormones or injecting hormones. Or
definitely.
And then they realize that that they aren't, in fact, transgender, and then because they deny or they go back and they detransition, they then become ostracized somewhat from the transgender community that they had somewhat put themselves in.
Like I said, it's my personal opinion that people shouldn't be allowed to do irreversible changes to their body until they're at least past 18.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean to say, when I look at the people that claiming they're gender fluid and a myriad of other gender identities, and then I look at some 4-year-old who simply says, Mommy, Daddy, I feel like I'm really a girl.
Yeah.
And I want to dress like a little girl. And they don't have any gender theory. They don't have all this down pat. But I'm more inclined to believe the 4-year-old. When I see these young children that they don't know any gender theory. They don't know all these classifications. All they know is that they don't feel that they are a little boy or a little girl. So I think they're legit where I'm more doubtful sometimes of the teenagers.
So how do you feel about, say, like it's a 4 or 5-year-old and they were, say, assigned male at birth, and then they claim that or proclaim to their parents that they are, in fact, female, but so they're going to school and everything, and then what should the parents do in that case?
Okay,
Like,
I think the first thing the parents should do is contact medical authorities and counselors that have the experience in this sort of thing.
Right.
It's not just, oh, my kid says, you know, that they are the opposite gender, and so I'm going to start dressing them in this way. And they can counsel these children. They can put them in therapy. They can talk to them to try to ascertain, you know, the reality of this.
Yeah.
And so many times they say, okay, we're going to let the child, because again, how long this lasts and how much it perseveres is one of the things that I think that they use to determine.
Yeah.
And so I don't see any harm in going ahead and letting the child from an early age, if you can get the counselors and the psychiatrists and the various healthcare professionals that have experience in this sort of thing, to go ahead and give it a whirl. Because, you know, you're worried, well, you might damage the kid. Well, you might damage them more if you force them to try to live as a little boy when every bit of their body is telling them they're just the opposite. And besides, they haven't done anything yet that's irreversible. If that child suddenly, at a later age, decides, no, I'm not and I want to not live my life as a girl anymore, then that's still an option.
Yeah.
So I'm very much against gender reassignment surgery at an early age.
You would rather they wait until they're 18?
Yes, till they're 18.
Until they can make
And
that
I'm
decision?
also very much in favor, even though it sort of rankles me that that gender dysphoria, you have to carry that label, that it's it's seen as a psychopathology.
Right.
But without that label of the psychopathology, then it would be almost impossible for people like me to get the surgery. And of course, you're in a double bind because you've got to do all this paperwork. And then when you apply to your insurance company, they say, well, you know, this is cosmetic surgery. This is experimental surgery. So you're held to all these standards by one part of the medical profession, while the other part says no, you know, the insurance part says no. So you're caught in a double bind. But at least you can get it done. Now, when I was in Montreal, one of the people there that had their surgery was paid for by the city of San Francisco. This person was the very first person to get gender reassignment surgery paid for by a city government. But that's very rare.
So what would you say about the fact, well, this puts a lot of things into perspective because of things where people are allowed to get tattoos or they're allowed to join the military at 18 years old. So the fact that the prefrontal cortex does not actually fully develop until, say, the age of 25 or above.
Well, I know. I've heard these arguments.
And
again,
we should
again, you just gave me my best argument, because we had guys that enlisted, you know, when they were 18.
Yeah.
And during the height of the Vietnam War, some of them were immediately shoved into an officer training course at Benning.
Yeah.
And they popped out a brand new second lieutenant at age 19. There were second lieutenants, age 19,
Right.
shipped off to Vietnam who were making life or death decisions for, you know, a platoon of men.
Yeah, and just for those of you not aware, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that actually deals with reasoning and decision making and everything that kind of filters out.
Well, if we're going to hold people, you know, to 25 for saying that that's when you're an adult, then we're going to have to do it with voting and with joining the army and everything else.
Not a lot of people would be happy about that.
Yeah.
Because they want to be.
And it's hard. And I am in favor also of what they call the gatekeepers. For even adults.
Oh, you're in favor of gatekeepers?
Yes, I am.
Okay, because a lot of people currently are not in favor of it, and I think that a lot of therapists have actually been, and this is from my own light research online, a lot of therapists, they tend to now, currently, they don't want to gatekeep anymore. There have been rules made against
Well,
that because of that label, because they don't want to be
if
seen
you
as
make
gatekeepers.
if you make it so that a person with enough money can just go to a surgeon and say, here's your 25 grand or whatever, do gender reassignment surgery, you're going to end up with more people killing themselves after they get out of the surgery. That's just a fact. Some people don't. Well, we had it. When we were up in Montreal, that was the big
Brandy,
big hubbub.
we didn't define what gatekeepers are. How would you define a gatekeeper?
Gatekeepers are the psychologists, and counselors who work with transsexual people to determine whether they really qualify, whether they really have the gender identity, and whether gender reassignment surgery is really proper and necessary for that individual.
Yeah.
And despite all the gatekeepers, occasionally people still have the surgery. And, I mean, it's almost literally when they wake up, they go, oh, my God, I made a big mistake. Mm-hmm. When I was up in Montreal, they had just shipped out somebody, and that was all the big hubbub up there, is that they'd had somebody that just kept on insisting that they wanted the surgery, and they had all the paperwork, and it was just like days when they got back from the hospital that they started screaming that they made a big, horrible mistake and ruined their life.
Mm. And that was that male to female, or?
Yeah, it was male to female. Yeah. And so even with the gatekeepers occasionally, and that's where some of the big universities and the big hospitals got out of the sex change business, because people were killing themselves and they were getting sued. It wasn't the little hospitals that initially were doing it. It was like Johns Hopkins and places like that. They like pioneered it. And they were the ones working with the Harry Benjamin, the Harry Benjamin standards of transsexual care.
Why do you think that they're so willing to do it right away? Is it because of the money? Because the person happens to have the money?
The surgeons really aren't. Most of the surgeons that I knew of and I dealt with, they subscribe to these certain standards, although they've changed over the years, that you had to live so long as a man or a woman before you could have the surgery.
That's considered gatekeeping.
And you had to have these various recommendations. I had to have a paperwork letter from a psychiatrist, and I also had to have a paperwork from a counselor that normally did transgender counseling.
Yeah.
Plus, I had to give them a lot of information on, my lifestyle. I sent them pictures of me at work. I sent them pictures of me standing there with my boss, so that everybody knows that I'd already integrated very well. And so they look at these things. Now, I don't know if that's the same way if you go to Thailand or India,
I very much doubt that.
Yes, I suspect that there are places on the planet, if you've got the money and you wanted to, have your head shaped into a whatever, they would do it.
Yeah, so
if you got the money.
That I guess that's my biggest point, is especially to minors, which in the US that would be under 18, it's a very, very serious decision. And the fact that a lot of this has been coming out in culture, like mainstream culture even, it seems it's been taken a lot more lightly.
Our friendly fairy dust person just put a little note here.
Yeah, he's
pulled up somewhere that said, according to his information, 9.8% to 41% of post-op patients are regretful. Now, I discussed this with Jim earlier, and I said that I doubted that I thought it was probably the lower figure, but then I also put this caveat that most of the people I dealt with, are the people that have come out, that are very active in the transgender community. And so it would be more likely that they were happy with their surgical outcomes. Where the person that wasn't happy or felt they'd made a huge monstrous mistake, that would be probably the person I wouldn't meet. That I wouldn't meet them at a transgender support group.
Right. And but I mean, I have watched some videos on YouTube where it's depressing. Like, nobody wants to hear about that, and that goes along with our like social culture right now. Is you see things on Facebook, on YouTube, people only want to post happy things. Like, yay, you know, I'm getting hormones. Like, yay, I'm doing this. But then once they kind of decide, like, okay, this is not something I want to do, they kind of either disappear from the scene, or there are a very small percentage that are coming out and they're just pointing out. But it's depressing to watch the video.
I would also
but
add
it's real.
that while I'm in favor of gatekeepers, I'm also realized that there were some psychiatrists and psychologists out there that just view transgenders as the fount of cornucopia of monetary blessings, that they just want to keep stringing you on another session because they're making money off of you.
Oh, okay.
So it's it's a midway. You've got to find somebody that's really concerned with you. I went to therapy for about a year with this group, and then she said, well, you've got to go and get an actual letter from a psychiatrist. So I went to a psychiatrist that worked right there at Medical City with me. So he came in and talked to him about 30 minutes, says, yeah, I'll write your letter. And I said, what? I said, you've only seen me one time. And he says, listen, I've been seeing you in the hallways for 6 or 7 years now. He says, I didn't know you were transgendered. I thought you were just another lady that worked somewhere. Oh, well, again, the fairy dust person has said that perhaps we should wrap it up. Now, one other thing. Our illustrious cameraman and lighting expert and everything else, Jim Hall, told me a little while ago that he was shocked, I tell you, that nobody had dropped an F-bomb yet. He assured us. So, just to keep Jim happy and our audience happy, I would like to say, fuck. Thank you. Now, we had to drop one F-bomb according to Jim, so.
Great.
I've done my duty. I hope none of you fell out of your chairs too shocked by our salty language. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun, Jim. Thanks for inviting me over. Hopefully, the local transgender community will not stone me with rocks for anything I've said today. Again, I'm not an expert. I know my own life story. But I don't know what's inside the head of everybody else. So I say, let's all be kind to one another. Let's especially be kind to the transgender community. They've had a rough go of it.
Yes.
From a lot of people that should have been their allies through the years that weren't. And it's, things change, folks, whether you like it or not. The world marches on, and sometimes some of the changes that come along for old 68-year-olds like me, we're going, oh my goodness, what's going on? But I think it's all going to come out just fine in the end. So be kind to one another, love one another.
Yes, for sure. And I would like to add that, I'm fully open to changing my opinion on a lot of these topics. So if anybody wants to send any links or any information that talks about, especially the whole non-binary pronoun thing that I'm just having trouble grasping personally.
And one more time, I'd like to put a pitch out for the book Transgender History by Susan Stryker. It is great. I'm not all the way through it yet. I sort of wanted to bone up on a few of these issues, and it's a fantastic book. I've learned a lot about the history of transgender that I didn't even realize.
All right. And you've been watching The Atheist Edge.
Atheist Edge. Walking the edge of what some consider offensive. But your feelings don't matter here, only facts. Edgy commentary on the dangers of doctrine, the foibles of faith, the bullshit of belief, the stupidity of superstition, and the idiocy of indoctrination. With razor-sharp wit, curiosity, and critical thought, we take an unblinking look at today's religions. We are Atheist Edge.